At my parents' retirement party, it was announced that I'd replace my dad at the firm. My brother snorted. She only got this because she's daddy's favorite. When I arrived, my office had been replaced with a break room. 8 hours later, I was digging through a shred bin with tears in my eyes. It was supposed to be a celebration, a simple, joyful occasion where my parents retired after decades of hard work at Morrison and Wolf. For as long as I could remember, my dad had been the backbone of the company, and my mom had always been there beside him, helping behind the scenes. I was proud of them, proud of how far they'd come, and I'd quietly worked my way up in the firm over the years. Not in any obvious way, but enough to know I was competent. My brother, Cole, though, he was the golden child, the one everyone knew would take over the moment my dad stepped down. When I got the call a few days ago that Dad planned to announce I would be taking over as CEO instead of Cole, I didn't quite know how to feel. A part of me was honored, of course, but the other part, maybe a larger part, was worried. What did it mean that my parents suddenly saw me as the one to lead the company? Did I even want it? But I didn't have time to question it because the party was already set and the plans were in motion. That night, I showed up to the party, a knot in my stomach. Mom and Dad were already mingling with old colleagues when I walked into their home. It was a fancy affair, full of laughter and congratulatory remarks, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept telling myself that this was a momentous occasion, not just for them, but for me too. I tried to shake the unease that kept creeping in. "Isla, you made it!" My dad's voice boomed as I stepped inside the living room. "Hi, Dad," I smiled, trying to seem enthusiastic. "You're looking good," he chuckled, ruffling my hair. "So proud of you, sweetheart," I nodded, but my thoughts were already racing. I could feel Cole's eyes on me from across the room, a familiar smirk plastered on his face. He didn't even bother to say hello. That was nothing new. For as long as I could remember, Cole had always had a problem with me. He never liked that I existed in the same space as him, competing for attention, for recognition. Finally, Dad called the room together, and it was time for the big announcement. "We've spent so many wonderful years at Morrison and Wolf," Dad began, his voice full of pride. "But now, it's time for us to step back. We've built something great, and we're excited to see where it will go next." He turned to me with that proud look on his face. "And I'm honored to announce that Isla will be taking over as the new CEO of the firm." The room fell silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I smiled, trying to stay composed, but my heart was racing. I looked to Cole, hoping to see something resembling support or happiness. Instead, I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes darken with something I couldn't quite place. His voice broke the silence. "She only got this because she's Daddy's favorite," he muttered loud enough for the whole room to hear. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. I froze. The room's attention shifted from me to Cole, and for a moment, everything felt like it was in slow motion. My mind was spinning. What had just happened? Why was he saying this? The words echoed in my head over and over, growing louder with each passing second. I tried to brush it off. My parents' smiles stayed plastered on their faces, but I could see the tightness around Dad's eyes. Mom looked visibly uncomfortable. But before I could react, Cole turned on his heel and stormed out of the room without another word. I felt like a stranger in my own life. The party went on around me, but I was no longer part of it. I barely heard the chatter, barely saw the smiles. All I could think about was what had just happened and how Cole had treated me. That night, after the party had wound down, I made my way to Morrison and Wolf. I told myself that the morning would bring clarity, that maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. But as I walked into the building the next morning, the weight of my decision to accept the CEO role felt heavier than ever. When I reached my office, I froze in my tracks. The space was completely empty. The desk was gone. The photos of my parents and me, the books, the documents. I looked around in disbelief, trying to process what was happening. My office had been replaced with a break room. The walls were bare, the chairs and tables scattered like it was just another room for employees to gather. My heart dropped into my stomach. I felt a lump form in my throat. "Excuse me," I called out to a passing staff member. Is this my office now?" She paused, confused. "No, this is the break room. Are you new?" "I've been with the firm for years," I said, my voice trembling. "Oh, well," she hesitated. "Maybe you should check in with HR. They've been moving things around a lot lately." I barely heard her as I walked toward the elevator. My mind was a whirlwind. This couldn't be happening. I had accepted the role. I was ready. I took the elevator up to the HR department, hoping that maybe this was some mistake. Maybe they'd accidentally assigned me to the wrong office. I was wrong. The HR manager, a woman I'd worked with for years, greeted me with a kind smile that quickly faded when I mentioned my office. She nodded sympathetically but didn't meet my gaze. "Isla, there's been a mistake," she said, her voice quiet. "The office spaces were reassigned. It seems the CEO position has been given to Cole." I blinked, struggling to process her words. "What do you mean? I was just announced as the new CEO. Why would it be given to Cole?" She looked uncomfortable. "There's been a shift in leadership. Cole has more experience leading teams, and the board felt he was a better fit for the role." "But I've been here for years," I said, my voice breaking. "I've been working for this, and now you're telling me that it was all for nothing." "I'm sorry," she said, looking genuinely regretful. "But the decision is final. They've moved forward with Cole." I left her feeling like I had been punched in the gut. Everything I thought I had earned had been ripped away from me in an instant. The office that should have been mine, the recognition I thought I deserved, it was all gone. Hours passed. I sat in the break room, trying to gather my thoughts. But everything felt hollow. I could feel the eyes of my coworkers on me. They knew what had happened, and the whispers were already starting. Cole's words from the night before rang in my ears. "Daddy's favorite." Was that how everyone saw me? Did they think I hadn't earned this role? When I returned to my office after the meeting, I found it a little more than a shell of its former self. No desk, no personal touch, no files, nothing. I stood there, staring at the emptiness. It was surreal. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? How had Cole, the one person who always seemed to undermine me, ended up with the position I had been fighting for all these years? I took a step back, trying to process what I had just been told. My vision blurred, and I gripped the edge of the desk that wasn't even mine anymore, the sharpness of the metal grounding me, though it offered no comfort. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, frozen in place. The office felt alien now, like a stage set for a play I wasn't cast in. But I had nowhere else to go. I had spent years building myself up to this moment, this position, only to find out that the rug had been pulled out from under me without so much as a warning. I looked down at my hands, now shaking slightly as the reality of the situation settled over me. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. Cole had won again. He always won. Even when I thought I had a chance, even when I had worked harder than anyone ever gave me credit for, it wasn't enough. "Excuse me, Isla." A voice cut through the fog of my thoughts. I turned around to find Jessica, one of the assistants who had been with the firm for a few years now. She was holding a folder in her hands, her expression a mix of sympathy and hesitation. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was asked to give this to you." She handed me the folder, and I took it without a word. Inside were several documents that looked like they were meant to be signed, but I didn't even look at them. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me. She noticed the look on my face and frowned, but said nothing. "I'll leave you to it," she murmured, stepping back. I nodded absently, and she left me standing in the middle of the office. Alone. I opened the folder anyway, trying to distract myself from the panic rising in my chest. There were papers detailing new assignments for me, nothing related to the CEO position, but instead tasks that felt like busy work. One of the documents suggested I would now be leading smaller projects, relegated to a position I had worked my entire career to avoid. This wasn't just a demotion, it was a complete overhaul of my place in the company. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing all the air out of me. I ran my fingers over the paper, fighting back tears. I had to find a way to fix this. But how? The decision had already been made. The board had spoken. My father had spoken, even if I hadn't heard him directly. I sat down in the uncomfortable plastic chair in front of the now empty desk. What was I supposed to do with all this? It wasn't just my office that had been taken away. It was my sense of self-worth. The company I had worked so hard for no longer felt like my future. I looked around again, taking in the stark, cold reality of the space. It didn't even feel like a place where my work mattered anymore. I thought back to the conversation at the party. The way Cole had snorted and made his comment about me being Daddy's favorite. Those words cut deeper than anything I had expected. At the time, I thought maybe he was just being petty, maybe trying to get under my skin, but now it felt like a prophecy. Like everyone in the company had already decided that I didn't deserve this, and they had whispered it into Cole's ears long before the announcement was made. I gripped the edge of the desk harder, the metal cold against my fingertips. I thought about going to Dad, trying to talk to him, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it would only make me look weak. He had already made his decision. He had already chosen Cole. But how could he? How could they all choose Cole? I walked out of the office, my mind spiraling. I couldn't sit there anymore. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and I needed to escape the suffocating pressure. I took the elevator down to the lobby, my hands still shaking. I was barely holding it together, trying not to break down in front of anyone. But what choice did I have? How was I supposed to fix something like this? My thoughts were racing, but there was no clarity, just the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. The longer I stood in the lobby, the harder it was to keep my composure. I turned around and walked straight into the HR manager again. This time, her expression was guarded, like she was preparing herself for what was coming. Isla, she started softly, her tone apologetic. I know this is a lot to process, but why didn't anyone tell me? I cut her off before she could finish. Why wasn't I informed about this before the announcement? Why was I left to look like a fool in front of everyone? Her eyes flickered briefly. I'm sorry. There wasn't time to speak with you before the announcement. But this was a company decision. There are a lot of things that changed over the past few months. I understand how this feels, but the shift in leadership was final. A shift in leadership? I repeated, incredulously. You're telling me that this was all decided behind my back, and no one even had the decency to inform me? She hesitated. I can't speak for the higher-ups, but Isla, I want you to know this was not a personal decision against you. Cole has more experience with leadership roles, and the board thought— The board, I interrupted, the bitterness in my voice growing sharper. Right, of course. The board thinks I'm not enough. Well, I'm sorry if my years of hard work didn't measure up to his leadership experience. My voice cracked as I said it. It wasn't the HR manager's fault, but at that moment, it felt like she was the face of all my frustration. She sighed, pressing her hands together. I understand your frustration, Isla, but you have to understand it's not about favoritism. It's about what the company needs moving forward. The company needs me, I snapped, the tears finally breaking through. But none of you can even see that. Her face softened, but she said nothing more. I could see the pity in her eyes. The last thing I wanted was pity. What I needed was a chance to prove myself. I had spent too many years in this place, too many years working to finally be seen, and now I was nothing more than a bystander. A piece on a chessboard someone had moved aside without even blinking. I turned away from her before I could say anything else. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want anyone's sympathy. I just wanted to figure out how to get back what I had worked so hard for. But right then, in that moment, I felt like I was drowning, like all my efforts had amounted to nothing. I left the building, my heart heavy, my thoughts scattered. As I walked into the streets of the city, I could barely make sense of anything. It felt like a bad dream, and I kept hoping I'd wake up, that it would all be some cruel joke. But I knew it wasn't. This was my reality now, and I had to figure out what I was going to do about it. I wandered aimlessly through the city streets, not really caring where I was going. The hum of traffic and the sound of people bustling around me felt distant, like I was living in some sort of fog. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had worked so hard for was slipping through my fingers. I had spent years dedicating myself to the firm, sacrificing personal time, sleep, and even friendships to prove myself. And for what? To be told that my entire career could be erased in the blink of an eye, that the title I'd longed for would be handed to someone else who, no matter what anyone said, had never worked as hard as I had. I didn't want to feel sorry for myself. I wasn't some helpless victim, but it was hard not to, especially when I kept replaying Cole's words from the party over and over in my head. Daddy's favorite. I hated that he said it in front of everyone. I hated that he had made me feel small in front of the very people I had tried to impress my entire life. But mostly, I hated that I had allowed myself to believe I was somehow immune to his jealousy, that this moment would somehow be different than every other time he'd made me feel like I didn't belong. I walked through the streets for what felt like hours, letting the night fall around me. The city lights blurred, and I found myself standing at the edge of a small park, not knowing how I had gotten there. The bench looked inviting, so I sat down. I let my head fall into my hands, taking slow, shaky breaths. My mind was racing, but everything seemed to slow when I closed my eyes. I had always been the one who played by the rules. I worked hard, kept my head down, and tried to make my family proud. But now I felt like nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years feeling like the second choice. The one who would never get the recognition my brother did. The one who had to fight twice as hard for half as much. And here I was, sitting in a park, questioning everything I thought I knew. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed in my pocket, dragging me out of my thoughts. "Dad is trying to reach you. He said it's important." I didn't even have to look at the message to know it was from my mother. She was the only one who reached out through texts like that when something was wrong. But I wasn't ready to talk to them yet, not after everything. Not after the way my father had silently allowed me to be humiliated at the party, and then the way he hadn't even bothered to warn me about the office changes. I had never been more furious with him. How could he have done that? How could he have blindsided me, leaving me to face the fallout alone? But more than anything, I was hurt. After a few minutes, I sighed and silenced my phone. There was nothing more to say right now. I needed to get my bearings, and I couldn't do that if I was tangled up in the web of family expectations. It wasn't long before I began walking again. My feet carried me down familiar streets, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I couldn't shake the sense that everything I knew had changed. My family, my place in the world, and the future I had worked toward. When I arrived back at my apartment, I closed the door quietly behind me. I hadn't been home in days, but now everything felt foreign. The walls, the furniture, nothing seemed like it belonged to me anymore. Even the comfortable, familiar hum of the refrigerator felt distant, like the sound of my life before all of this had started. I dropped my bag on the floor and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing through 1,000 different thoughts at once, but none of them brought clarity. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the messages from my mom. She had texted me a few more times, each one more urgent than the last. "Honey, please, we need to talk. This isn't how we planned it. Don't shut us out." "Isla, please pick up the phone. Dad is upset too, and we need to talk about this. You've been so strong for so long, but we can't help you if you don't let us." I stared at the texts for a while. There was a part of me that wanted to pick up the phone and speak to them, to hear them explain how this all went wrong. But another part of me, an angry, hurt part, refused to give them that satisfaction. What could they possibly say? What could they say that would make up for the way they had betrayed me, how they had handed my life over to Cole without so much as a second glance? I leaned back, closing my eyes. My mind turned back to the conversation with the HR manager earlier. She had tried to be kind, but it didn't matter. The truth was, I wasn't just angry at Cole. I was angry at myself. Angry that I had trusted them, that I had allowed myself to believe this was the moment that would define my career. But now it felt like it had all been a facade, a cruel trick played by the people I thought I could count on the most. The night dragged on, and I found myself sinking deeper into that dark space of frustration and confusion. The world felt heavy. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't pick it up this time. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I stayed like that for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment, feeling lost in my thoughts. What could I do now? How could I even start to fix this? The next morning, I woke up to the reality of it all over again. The silence in the apartment felt even more suffocating. I was afraid to call my parents, afraid of the conversation that would inevitably follow. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of. Was it the guilt that would come from confronting them? Or was it the possibility that they didn't truly understand the gravity of what they had done? I sat up in bed, my head pounding. I couldn't keep running from this. The only way out was through. I grabbed my phone, opened my messages, and stared at the text from my mom. My fingers hovered over the screen, uncertain of what to say. Should I apologize for shutting them out? Should I confront them directly? I didn't know. Instead, I sent a simple message. "I need to talk." It wasn't much, but it was a start. I had no idea where the conversation would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this lie unanswered. I wasn't going to let Cole win. Not like this. The message I sent was simple, yet it felt like the first step in taking back some control. I set my phone down and stared at it for a while, waiting for a response. The seconds turned into minutes, and the minutes into hours. My thoughts spiraled. Had I made a mistake? Would they try to apologize and tell me everything would be okay? Or were they simply going to ask me to accept what had happened and move on? But I wasn't ready to move on. Not yet. Not until I had something that made sense of it all. And I would be damned if I let Cole win, or let my parents believe they could just brush everything under the rug. The silence in my apartment felt suffocating as I paced back and forth. Finally, around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. "We're coming over. Let's talk." I stared at the text for a moment, trying to control the nerves that were suddenly clawing at me. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this, but I had to be. If I didn't face them now, I'd never be able to move forward. Within an hour, my parents were at my door. The moment I opened it, I could see the strain on both of their faces. My dad, typically the strong, unflappable one, looked smaller. My mom, who had always been the calming force in our family, seemed uncertain, as if she wasn't quite sure how to make things right. "Isla," Dad began, but his voice faltered. He cleared his throat. "I know you're angry." "Angry," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You bet I'm angry. Do you think this is easy for me, Dad? You just handed over my future to Cole without even consulting me, without even telling me what was going on." Mom stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Isla, we never meant for things to happen this way. We thought we were doing the right thing. But looking back, I realize how much we've hurt you." The words were hollow, but there was pain in her eyes. The truth was, I wasn't sure I could even look at them the same way anymore. It wasn't just about the CEO position. It was about trust. It was about how they had made me feel invisible, like my hard work had never really mattered. "I don't know how you thought this was the right thing," I said, my voice growing firmer. "You made me believe I was being considered for the position. You made me feel like all my sacrifices were worth it. But what happened when the time came? You gave it to Cole. And why? Because he's always been your favorite?" The words stung even as I said them, but I couldn't hold back. I needed to hear the truth. Mom flinched, but Dad didn't back down. "It wasn't about favoritism, Isla," he said, his voice steady now. "I've been proud of you in ways I don't think you've ever fully understood. But Cole's experience, his leadership skills were undeniable. The board made the decision, not us." "Then why wasn't I consulted? Why didn't you give me a chance?" I asked, feeling the knot in my chest grow. "You're my parents, for God's sake. You should have told me what was going on. You should have trusted me enough to fight for it." Dad took a deep breath, his face softening. "I should have, Isla. I should have fought for you. I realize that now. But Cole was always the one we thought could handle the stress, the challenges, the responsibilities. It was never about you not being good enough. It was about us thinking you weren't ready." I could hear the remorse in his voice, but it didn't undo what had been done. It didn't change the fact that Cole's words at the party still echoed in my ears. But something shifted in me then. It wasn't just about them anymore. It wasn't just about me being hurt. It was about standing up for myself, about proving to everyone, including myself, that I had more to offer than any of them had ever realized. I stood up straighter, my voice steady and clear. "I'm done with the excuses. I'm done with being overlooked. If you want me to prove that I'm ready, I'll do it, but it's not going to be the way you expect." "Isla, what are you talking about?" Dad asked, his brow furrowing. "I'm going to take back what's mine," I said, each word deliberate. "I'm not going to let Cole walk into that CEO office without understanding exactly what it costs. You want him to lead this company? Fine. But I'm not just going to sit here and watch him destroy everything I've worked for." Mom looked at me with wide eyes. "Isla, what are you going to do?" I met her gaze without hesitation. "I'm going to leverage everything I've built here. I'm going to make them see exactly what they've been blind to all these years." I turned away from them then, pacing the room again, trying to gather my thoughts, my plan. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It wasn't about revenge in the way they might think. No, it was about something much bigger. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. I wasn't going to let Cole destroy what I had worked for. I wasn't going to let my parents dismiss me any longer. They had to understand that I wasn't just some backup option. I had something to offer. And the only way they would see that was if I showed them. That night, I sent out a series of emails to my closest contacts within the company, people I had trusted for years, people who had seen my dedication, my work ethic, my ability to lead even when I wasn't given the title. I made sure they understood that I was ready to prove myself in ways that would make the board rethink their decision. The next few days were a whirlwind. I dug into the firm's financials, read through every document I could find, and researched the projects that had been handed to Cole. I looked for cracks in the system, places where he wasn't as capable as they thought. And when I found them, I used them. I didn't play dirty. I didn't need to. But I made sure that the people who had placed their trust in Cole saw the same flaws I had seen all along. I made sure the board understood exactly what was at stake, what would happen if they continued to let someone lead who wasn't prepared. And slowly, very slowly, the tide began to shift. It took weeks, weeks of hard work, of proving myself, of showing the board that I was the one who should have been in charge all along. But one morning, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I opened it, and my heart skipped a beat. Dear Isla, the email began. After a comprehensive review of the recent developments and the leadership initiatives you've spearheaded, the board has come to a decision. We are offering you the position of CEO at Morrison & Wolf. Your leadership and vision for the company are undeniable. We believe you are the right person for this role. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. I had done it. A knock on my office door broke the silence, and I looked up to see Cole standing in the doorway. He looked different, tired, frustrated. He seemed like a man who had been caught off guard. I heard, he said, stepping into the room. Isla, I never meant for things to go this way. I looked at him, but my gaze was steady, calm. You never meant for things to go this way, huh? I said softly. Well, Cole, sometimes things don't go the way we want, but I'm not sorry for how things turned out. He swallowed hard, clearly struggling to find the words. I could see the anger, the jealousy that had always been simmering beneath the surface. But now there was something else, regret. I gave him a small smile. Congratulations, Cole, you just lost the job you wanted. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel sorry for him.